Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to my podcast, Life's Treasures and Golden Moments. This is Natalie Silva. Hope everyone is doing well and life is good for each of you. Where has the time gone? I can hardly believe we are already in the middle of spring, and now summer is fast approaching. I have been away from my studio the past few months working on another project, so I've gotten a bit behind in sharing my stories with you. So I thought today, to catch up, I would like to share several stories with you on miracles from a variety of sources. Let me start out today with a couple of touching stories on miracles and children. As adults, we can learn so much from children. If one thinks about it, every child is a miracle. Their innocence in loving ways, their desire to learn as they grow on their life's journey. What treasures and what a special gift they are. The first story I want to share is titled Glorious Harvest, and the author is Brian D. Miller. The threshing season was an exciting time when I was a boy growing up on a farm in eastern Kansas in the 1930s. The whole community helped harvest the wheat, working one farm and then moving on to another. For 2 or 3 days every summer, our place was filled with people. All our neighbors came, and extra workers were hired for $1 a day. $1 more if they had horses and a wagon. It was as if the circus had come to town, complete with giant machines, teams of horses, and a constant parade of rumbling wagons. I was up extra early one of those mornings doing my chores and running through the barnyard with the chickens squawking out of my way. I had a favorite perch from which to watch everything, and I dreamed of being old enough to participate. All the farmers used Elmer's steam-powered threshing machines, and I remember seeing it clunk, chug, chug, chug up and down the road, rattling the planks of the bridge as it crossed the Maris de Jeans River, flowing by our farm. Horses pulled open-sided hay racks, grain wagons, and they looked like wooden boxes, and the wagon filled with water for Elmer's machine. I remember one harvest better than all the others, and a July day that changed my life forever. It was already hot that morning as I stood on our screen porch to get a view of the wagons when they first turned into the lane. Later, I sat by the well, listening to the men trade stories while they stopped for a cold drink of water. They laughed at each other's jokes and wiped sweat from their faces with bright red bandanas. They talked eagerly of a cool swim in the river and of the delicious smells coming from the house where the womenfolk were preparing a feast. After the men headed back to the thrasher, I stood at the well and watched them work. Dad came by late in the afternoon. "Day's almost over, Brian," he said. I guess I looked disappointed because Dad put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Your mother and I think that you're big enough now to help on the grain wagon. What do you say?" My dream had come true. I ran happily beside my dad towards the thrasher. The workers wielded pitchforks from hay racks on both sides, tossing bundles of wheat on a conveyor, leading to the belly of the machine. The thresher devoured the wheat, separating the seed and forcing the star up a chute, where it blew into the air and fell down to form a stack on the ground. Grain poured like sand from another chute into the deep box-like wagon. "Your job is to shovel the grain away from the chute as it comes down," Dad said. "Spread it out so it won't pile up and spill over into the sides. Your cousin Dick will be here to help." He boosted me up the tall side of the grain wagon, and I stood in the wagon and watched with fascination and pride. Children were not allowed near the thrasher. Up close, the machine was huge, a maze of pulleys and belts, with a separator at the end of one long belt and the steam engine at the other. It belched black smoke and breathed fire as the engineer fed it with shovels of coal. Dad hitched horses to a full wagon and drove away toward the granary. A hay rack rumbled, and squealed into unloading position, and men tossed the golden bundles into the creaking conveyor belt. Clouds of dusty straw blew through the chute. Horses snorted and stomped, afraid of the whirling wheels and the belts. The penetrating smells of wet leather, coal smoke, manure, and sweat hung heavily in the hot air. Dick arrived and jumped up onto the wagon floor. We each grabbed a shovel and leveled out the grain as it poured steadily from the chute. Dick said, "You've got the hang of it, Brian. Keep scooping and I'll be back in a few minutes." Dick climbed out of the wagon, and I continued to shovel the grain and spread it evenly around it. It was hot down there in the wagon, and my shoulders began to ache, but I didn't care. I felt good working by myself. I was helping my dad. The machine roared as the grain cascaded into the wagon, and the light from the settling sun glared into my eyes. The air was thick with dust. I had to squint to see. Wheat beards scratched my neck and arms, but I couldn't stop shoveling because the grain poured from the chute so fast it began to cover my feet and my legs. I worked harder, but it piled up faster and faster than I could scoop. Sweat ran down my forehead and stunned my eyes. And when I took a second to wipe my face on my shoulder, I dropped the shovel. In an instant, it sank out of sight into the bed of the grain. I groped for it, desperate, but it was lost. I tried to spread the grain with my hands, but it poured out faster and faster. Where was Dick? Where was Dad? Through the haze, I could see some men on the rack on the other side, but they were still tossing bundles, and they weren't even looking at me. The machine roared so loud, no one would hear if I called for help. Suddenly, a dense cloud of straw blew directly into my face. I was blinded. Grain kept pouring out of the chute, pulling up all around me. I couldn't push it away fast enough. I couldn't move my legs. I threw my hands over my face, and something deep inside me cried out as I fell forward into the grain. I'll never know what happened next or how much time passed. I thought I would sink down into the grain like the shovel and disappear forever. But I landed in someone's arms. I felt myself being lifted up and carried to the back of the wagon where I would be safe. 3 strange men were with me, or at least they were like men. The one who carried me gently picked wheat beards from my face. Then he poured water on a piece of soft linen and wiped the pain from my eyes. The other 2 leveled out the grain. I wondered if they were angels, but the light was so bright I couldn't see them clearly. One of the 3 seemed to be in charge, and he somehow got the attention of the farmers by the thrasher. The roar of the machinery stopped as someone shut it down. Then I saw Dad. He climbed quickly into the wagon and grabbed me, holding me close. He seemed worried. He wiped the grain from my face, but his hands were rough and dirty, and his bandana wasn't soft like the one the strangers used. I asked him where they were. Who? He asked. The 3 who were with me. There was no one with you, Brian. You were here all alone. After he could see I was all right, he hitched a team of horses to the wagon. As we headed toward the granary, I saw the 3 again, and one ran to the back of the wagon where I was riding. "This day is important," he said, "but you won't understand it for a long time." Before I fell asleep that night, I thought of the thrasher and the grain and the 3 who helped me. I sensed I was different somehow because of everything that had happened. But the next morning, I woke up and ran through the barnyard with the chickens squawking, and I just went about the business of being a little boy. Years passed before I thought about my experience again. A long time, just as I had been told. I had children of my own before I began to appreciate that God had sent his angels just for me. I still can't describe them or explain how they appeared and disappeared so quickly, but I understand more than the young boy who was afraid no one would hear him call for help. Today, I'm retired from a career in aeronautical engineering, and I enjoy working on my wife's little farm. I built a third story on the barn so I can climb up there to study the stars. I'll never fully comprehend the wonders of God and His universe, but when I pray, often without words, I know He hears me. Thank you, Brian Miller, for that very touching story. It also brings back a memory to me that my brother and I shared when we were little kids. We had a farmer that lived down the street from us, and then he would do that every year during the season, harvest season. And one year he asked us to help, and we got on the back of the wagon, and what we did was we just would stamp down the hay that he would put up there. But it was a beautiful memory and things you remember as children. Brian, your story was very touching, and it brought to mind to me as I shared your story the psalm that says, "For the angel of the Lord guards and rescues all who show deep respect and love for him." Thank you for those beautiful angels that rescued you. The next story I'd like to share with you is titled, "You Are My Sunshine," and the author is Carolyn Bliss. At 5'5", with his twinkling, bespectacled eyes and round belly, my grandfather reminded me of a Polish elf. Papa loved me and I loved Papa. I loved the way he took me out to dinner at a local steakhouse and let me order a Shirley Temple and eat all the rolls and butter curls I wanted. I loved the way he surprised me with books all about art and poetry and science and encouraged me to dream big dreams. Through Papa's eyes, his kindly eyes, it seemed that nothing I said or did could ever stop him from loving me. But most of all, I loved the way Papa sang to me. For such a small man, he had a big voice, and he sang to me a lot, holding me on his sturdy lap at the kitchen table, tucking me under the covers at bedtime. From my earliest memories, the song was always the same. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." I was 11 years old when Papa died. In the years following his death, there were numerous times that I would yearn to hear his words of approval and encouragement and guidance. But never did I miss Papa more than when I discovered I was expecting a baby, Papa's first great-grandchild. I had hoped our baby's birth might coincide with Papa's early September birthday, but complications sent me to the hospital early on August 31st, 1993. Through the haze of pain, exhaustion, and anesthesia, I heard the doctor's voice. "It's a girl, Mrs. Bliss." A daughter, Emily. I glimpsed her sweet face for only a moment, and then she was whisked away to the nursery. In the recovery room, my thoughts returned to Papa. Surely in heaven, God will somehow find a way to let him know the good news. I didn't see Emily again until the next evening when my husband and parents brought her to me from the nursery. "You're not going to believe this," my father said as he lowered her into my waiting arms. It was then I saw the lettering on the front of her knitted newborn cap. "You are my sunshine," it read. I couldn't speak. "Emily was wearing this when we picked her up in the nursery," my father said. "I asked the nurse if all the newborns' caps were like this. She said they were all plain. She couldn't figure or imagine where this one had come from." At that moment, holding Emily in my arms, marveling at the multiple miracles of her birth and the special message she wore, I knew what I had to do. "You are my sunshine," I sang as I stroked her tiny button-neck nose. "My only sunshine." I knew Papa would approve. Thank you, Carolyn, for sharing your touching story. It gave me goosebumps as I read each word. Another beautiful miracle. God does work in mysterious ways. The next subject, and one of my favorite topics, is miracles about animals. My Patty Pat, authored by Lisa Russo, a story about a little girl and a horse, and the special connection and the bond between them, and how it helped make a difference in each of their lives. You will definitely enjoy this story. Most kids get the sniffles, a cough, or a sore throat now and then, but my daughter, Tori, gets sick a lot, and even a common cold can send her to the hospital, or worse. Tori has common variable immune deficiency, or CVID. It's a serious immune disease, a form of the boy in the plastic bubble disease that you've heard about. Fortunately, we don't have to keep Tori in a bubble. Our doctor even encourages us to take her out, to let her spend some time with other kids when she can, and lead as normal a life as possible. So that's how she met Patty. When Tori was 5, she had bronchitis 10 times in as many months. Each time we rushed her off to the doctor for antibiotics or the hospital for IVs. One time driving home, my mind was clouded with worries. I glanced into the rearview mirror as my daughter, terribly thin and tiny as a 3-year-old, her fine blonde hair sticking against her pale cheeks. God, why does this child have to have this horrible disease? But then I heard soft sounds from the back seat. Tori was singing cheerfully. If she could bear it, I could be strong too. Several days later, Tori was feeling much better. Let's take her to Newark's, my husband Tom suggested. Her friend Newark owned a horse farm in Freehold, New York. Tori's favorite place to visit. She loved the miniature horses and knew most of them by name. A day in the country would be good for her. Tori was the first one in the car. She wore her cowboy boots nearly up to her knees and her favorite horse shirt. As we drove up alongside the pastures of the King Hill miniatures, I watched the little horses kick up their heels in the warm sunshine. Full of spring friskiness, they galloped and cavorted. Tori clapped her hands, and when the car stopped, she opened the door and dashed out to the pasture gate. Newkirk was there to meet us. Watch out for Patty, she's a ramrod today. It wasn't the first time I'd heard about Patty. Newkirk had his hands full with the young silver chestnut mare from the day he got her. I can't do anything with this horse, he'd complain. She never listens to me, and she raises Cain on the farm and runs around like a demon. Tori squeezed through the gate, and fortunately, she had one thing on her mind. Patty, she called, clapping loudly. I caught up and grasped her hand. Let's go see the other horses. But Tori shook her head firmly. Patty Pat, she called. In the distance, Patty raised her head from grazing. When Tori called again, the horse perked her ears and turned toward us. Then all of a sudden, she bolted out of the way like a streak of lightning. Oh, no, I didn't have time to react. I just threw my arms around Tori as the horse bore down on us. Tori, however, relaxed in my arms. Her body wrinkled excitedly, her little arms stretched out, reaching for the horse. I saw Tom charge toward us as Ulrich run to catch the horse, but as Patty was only a breath away, something amazing happened. Instead of ramming into us, or bucking, or any of the wild behavior she usually displayed, she stopped dead in her tracks. She whinnied very softly, like she was saying, hello. Her deep brown eyes stared right at Tori. Something in the horse's expression told me she sensed she should be gentle with this child. Tori reached up and touched her silky neck. Norfolk stared at his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open. That horse never does that for me, he said. When I call her a name, she runs the other way like a rocket shot. Patty lowered her nose and sniffed Tori. who giggled. I loosened my grip. What was going on? The horse was usually rough and unmanageable. Tori reached up and hugged the horse. Patty just stood there, still as a statue. She let Tori walk all around her, kissing her. I wiped a tear, seeing how tender this horse became with my daughter. They wandered around the field together, fast friends, until it was time to go. Then Patty followed Tori to the gate. I don't get it, said Newark, shaking his head. She never has done that before for anyone. You've seen her wild as the day she was born. As our car pulled away, Tori wrenched around in her seat trying to see Patty. And what was Patty doing? Pawing at the pasture gate as if she wanted to follow us home. From then on, we brought Tori to the farm to visit Patty as often as we could. Newark even let us buy Patty and keep her in his place. Patty just as wild as ever, except when Tori was around. Then she was calm and docile as a kitten. No one could explain it. Tori's effect on Patty was clear, but just as amazing was Patty's effect on Tori. When Tori started school, she missed so many days due to illness. We eventually had to have her homeschooled. She couldn't play contact sports or join in with other kids her age the way she wanted. Going out was awkward sometimes. She'd have to wear a mask to protect her from germs. I worried about her missing out on a social life that is so important to young girls. Few moms felt comfortable including her on sleepovers, considering her medical issues. Every time she got sick, a scary thought lurked in the back of my mind. What if this time she didn't respond to the treatments? What if she didn't get better? She didn't have the kind of life that other little girls had. Every 2 weeks, she had to endure IVs and immune medication. The side effects left her sick and exhausted for days after. It crushed me to see her like that. I sobbed into my pillow. God, I know this is your child and you know what's best, but my daughter is so weak. Sometimes we feel so hopeless. When she curled up in a ball on the couch, quiet and motionless, I worried. Did she lose the will to go on? But when she saw Patty, everything was different. We'd pull up the drive and she'd head right to the pasture. Where's my Patty Pat? Every time the horse came galloping. When Tori felt well, they ran together in the field. When she didn't feel well, Tori sat on the ground and Patty just stood over her like a little sentry. One time Tori was too weak to play outside, so I pulled up a chair and sat her in front of the stall. Patty pushed her nose over the door. I left them together for a while to go talk with Newark. When I returned, Tori's school books lay open on her lap, and she was reading aloud to Patty. Mom, she's going to be the smartest horse in the world, Tori beamed. I laughed and I hugged her tight. One day, Patty suffered a devastating injury. She cut the tendon sheath on the back of her leg. No one could change her bandages. She hates people messing with her. She doesn't like them touching her legs, said Newark. The horse thrashed and she kicked. Her nostrils flared. Her eyes bulged. But when we brought Tori to the stable, Patty's eyes softened, her gaze glued to Tori. She let us change her bandages, and Patty stood stock still as Tori talked and sang to her. Tori is 11 now. She struggles with her illness, but whenever she gets down, she thinks about Patty and smiles. Illness after illness, treatment after treatment. Somehow she gets through, and the first thing she asks is to go to the farm. Clearly, she found the will to endure everything she'd face so she could spend more time with her Patty. There's no way we can know why Patty is calm only for Tori, or how Tori draws strength and hope from the little horse. I just know that God put Patty in our little girl's life for a reason. Where's my Patty Pat? calls Terry, and I know the answer. She's by your side and in your heart, the answer to a mother's prayers. For God can send miracles of hope in many ways, even in the form of a rebellious little horse. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing your story. God provides an abundance of miracles through his special gift of animals. The next story is titled A Sheep's in Wolf's Clothing, and the author is Dorothy Faye Higbee. A story about a pound puppy, the unconditional love he brought to his adopted family, and the lessons that were learned. Learning to love, in deed and truth, is much harder than most people realize. In my case, God's rich sense of humor and classroom instruction showed up with 4 paws, a tail, and lots of fur. Lucian was a pound puppy, part wolf, part Malamute. He was abandoned at the Moscow, Idaho animal shelter and destined to be euthanized. After all, who in their right mind would want a young wolf mix? Our son Jerry, that's who. He fell in love with a gray and black puppy with a white stripe down his nose and brought it home. He brought it home all right, to our house, not his, and we already had one big dog that was quite protective of his territory. We were a little apprehensive, but took in the cute creature because his soft eyes and happy smile tugged at our hearts. Then he started tugging on everything else. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. James 1:4. I'm not one to give up on people or animals, but this one proved to be a real test of our fortitude. His first few months in our home were wrought with disasters. He ate our couch, a queen-size sleeper, all the way to the frame. He ate my husband's metal detector earphones. He ate 2 television remotes. His life expectancy waned as we tried every method of attack known to man, from Tabasco sauce on the furniture to big rawhide bones. He didn't care for rawhide and really loved the flavor of Tabasco. He cowered when we tried to pet him, which meant he had been abused, so we set about to alter the dog's destructive behavior. That wasn't counting the deep layers of fur that came off the dog's body at certain times, of the year when they shed. His fur killed at least 2 vacuums, so the first step was to ban him from the house when we were not inside. That went over well. Both Lucian and our big Newfoundland dog named Joshua became partners in crime. One week, Joshua stuffed his big head under the fence and held it up so Lucian could escape, and they both sauntered off for a walk around the neighborhood. It was one of the busiest streets in our town. My husband was at work, and we wouldn't be able to fix the fence until the weekend. I was beside myself with worry that the entire week, knowing that while we were at work, they were probably out and I'd have to hunt them down. I prayed hard that the dog catcher would be snoozing in his office instead of chasing our dogs, and that all the cars would miss them. On the last day of the week, the dogs were actually in the yard when I got home. I noticed the back gate had new boards nailed horizontally over it. Either my husband had lost it, or someone got fed up with a wandering bear and wolf in the neighborhood. Turned out to be exactly that. A frustrated neighbor did the honeydew list before my honey got home and got to it. Something oddly familiar dawned on me about Lucian's rather annoying behavior. People who have been abused also act accordingly to their own feelings, rather than an acceptable set of guidelines. They also require heaps of patience and lots of extra cleanup after they've been around. Although I think a vacuum is easier than the cleanup after some people, I could almost hear the Lord snicker. What took you so long? Armed with a new view of our situation, we began to treat Lucian as part of our family or pack. As the months passed, he stopped eating all the plastic in the house and learned the rawhide wasn't so bad after all. As soon as the fence was permanently fixed, he even stayed in the yard with his pal and softened to become a very real blessing in our family. He slept by the bed at night beside his brother and rarely exhibited the wacky behavior present at the beginning of his arrival. We learned to apply the principles of loving the dog to people and found that if the love is consistent and available, people can grow beyond their bad past. Lucian was an excellent example of success with love. Then one day, his pal Joshua passed away. A bout with bone cancer took the big Newfoundland and left Lucian alone. He was devastated, as most people are who lose a loved one. He sat by my bed with his head on my covers and whimpered through the night. I take that back. He and I both whimpered through the night. We were both a complete wreck, so it was time to find a new puppy. An investigation through the local newspaper revealed a Newfoundland breeder with one pup left. A new puppy came to live with us, a fluffy black brother for Lucian, whose name was Ezekiel. Although Lucian he wasn't too happy about having to share mom and dad. Zeke grew on him. They got along famously, or infamously, as the case may be, and Lucian was now big brother of the family. Whether teased by a local rabbit, sprayed by a skunk, or examined as possible food by a roaming cougar, the boys, as I call them, grew into adventurous and always humorous creatures. Well, except perhaps for the 2 weeks it took to get the skunk smell out of their fur. Even our granddaughter fell in love with a wolf pup with a soft heart and even softer fur. On a crisp September afternoon in 2002, the boys began to bark excitedly. I opened the door just in time to see Lucian launch himself off the back porch and fly through the air to try and catch up to whatever had him excited. He yelped and fell to the ground, unable to walk on all 3 legs. Zeke walked back to sniff his brother and looked up at me with worry in his eyes. My husband and I loaded the dog into the car and sped off to the vet clinic. The vet told us the dog had done exactly what Joe Montana, the football star, did. He tore the ligaments in his back leg. Dr. Erickson told us that in an animal his size, the best treatment would be surgery to repair the damage, otherwise the dog would more than likely be lame. The surgery would be around $750, which was not in our household ability at that time. We loaded the dog back into the car and took him home. We simply didn't have that kind of extra money. Sadness gripped me as I wept over the dog. I stroked Lucian's wolf coat and looked deep into his golden eyes. We couldn't put him down, so I started praying. Then the Holy Spirit nudged my heart. Do you do this for people? What's your response to people who damage themselves? Do you care enough to believe for them and pray for God's mercy, or do you run from them? My heart broke. I'd rather not deal with those who are difficult. I needed true love that persevered. If God could do that for me, I should be able to do it for others. A few days later, it seemed that the dog had learned to hobble on 3 legs. But another yelp, another porch launch, and Lucian had damaged the other leg. We needed desperately to fix the back porch, which we did. You could tell he was in serious pain, as he could not move without severe yelping. I prayed even harder. Oh yes, and a little hollering at God was in there too. We not only didn't have enough money to spend on 2 legs, this time I was madder than ever at my dog being hurt. I prayed strongly, even gave him baby aspirin daily. I wasn't going to disappoint the Lord again, If I could hang in there with a dog, I could hang in there with people. While he didn't move much for a few days, one afternoon I opened the back door to find him running. Yes, running across the backyard. No limping, no yelping, no whimpering, just running, and a full ability to keep up with his buddy Zeke. It was a true miracle, one of God's compassions that carried a lesson for people and animals alike. The vet was surprised, but because he is a Christian, he just smiled when he saw the dog again. God is love. Lucian made me wonder if we would ever have love for people as well as dogs love us. Rescued from death, love back to peace, and the lessons for humans prolific. Dog is just God spelled backward. You know, I'm pretty sure the Lord gets a kick out of that because there is love lessons in there for our lives if we will listen. Lucian passed away of old age in the fall of 2006. He turned out to be a sheep and wolf's fur, a part of our family flock we will never forget. He taught us how to love in spite of bad behavior, and that love truly does cover a multitude of sins. In true heavenly humor, the Lord has us start a home church in 2003, which allowed us to put into practice the lessons we had learned. We will miss the dog, but we will never forget the truths hidden in his life. And thank you, Dorothy Higbee, for sharing your story, a beautiful example of lessons learned, finding great joy in unselfish deeds, and the special connection with the creatures that God places in our lives. Moving forward, I now want to share with you a couple of stories about the miracle of healing. People often speak about miracles, but they don't really know for sure or understand what they really are. It's been said that miracles are only limited by our imagination. In life, one experiences a miracle in different ways. Some are ordinary and some may change a life. The two stories that I share with you today are about people who have had to face a threat to their lives or a serious illness where perhaps there isn't always a cure. The first story about miracles and healing is called Unconditional Love, and the author is Jean Martin. Throughout my life, my mother has been my biggest fan. She always told me I was beautiful, smart, and talented. Even as an adult, when I was working as a teacher and would meet my mother for lunch every day, I could count on having my ego stroked and my self-confidence increased. Mother listened with rapt attention to everything I said, knew just what to do to encourage me, and always offered support. But then I began to notice changes in my mother. They were so subtle at first that only I, who saw her every day, noticed them. Her cheerful, optimistic attitude was replaced by suspicion and fear. Her interest in her appearance diminished, and I often found her at lunch dressed in dirty, torn blouses. Her conversations became self-centered and filled with paranoia and fears concerning her house, her money, and people in her life. I was so concerned about her personality change, I got my mother to visit a doctor. He diagnosed her as having advanced dementia. I was devastated. As the months passed, my mother's short-term memory diminished, and she became a person who either lived in the past or centered on the immediate moment, forgetting what had transpired over only hours or minutes before. I mourned the loss of my nurturing mother and felt little joy in visiting her and undertaking the new responsibilities of caring for her. The God my mother prayed to every day seemed to have forgotten her. Visits to her became sad parts of my daily routine, and I longed for a return to happier times. One night, as I lay on my couch at home, the telephone rang, and my mother's neighbor reported that my mother had fallen and was lying on the living room floor in obvious distress. She was taken to the hospital and x rayed. Her left shoulder and back had been seriously bruised. Her mobility was greatly reduced, and she had to remain in the hospital. This was all very confusing for a lady suffering from severe dementia. Every day was like torture to her. She felt her family had abandoned her to the care of others. I realized that leaving Mother in the hospital was not helping her, so I took a leave of absence from my teaching position and I brought her home. Those first days were horrible. She was confused about where she was and often called me nurse. Her mind frequently wandered to the past. While it was frustrating for me initially, I soon realized that it allowed me to see parts of my mother's life I had never known before. At times, she thought she was still married to her first husband, Freddie, and I listened as she recounted what it was like to be a young bride during World War II, married to a sailor on convoy duty. She worried about him, but said giving birth to his son was a great joy in her life. She sadly recounted how Freddie only saw Teddy, their son, on a brief visit before he had to return to duty. She was eagerly awaiting his return when the devastating telegram arrived. He had been killed while crossing the North Atlantic. She was alone with their son, but faced her new life bravely. She found joy in her son, and with her resilient, resourceful nature, conquered her grief and raised her son for 10 years on her own. She gave to him what she gave to me: nurturing love, undivided attention, unwavering support, and enthusiastic encouragement. Gradually, I found myself giving those gifts back to my mother. My depression melted away, and I started to cherish the time I got to spend with her, reliving her life through memories and becoming her biggest supporter. To my great joy, she was eventually able to get up from chairs in her bed independently. We celebrated every achievement. When she remembered what day of the week it was, we rejoiced. And if she forgot what street she lived on, we meandered down the memory lane and she spoke of all the places she had lived. This lessened her anxiety and eventually allowed her to recall her life with me. I realized at last what my mother had understood so long ago: the power of unconditional love. It was the love she'd given to me all my life, the love I gradually learned to return to her. I knew that such a love could exist, especially with God's help, and it was through my mother that I learned how to make that love a reality. Thank you, Jean Martin, for sharing your story and a reminder that God is there by our side, that we are loved, and our faith will be stronger in our healing journey. Did you ever find a coin somewhere and wondered where it came from? This next story is titled Some Pennies Really Might Be from Heaven, and the author is Phyllis Edgerly. For nearly 20 years, my father headed south like so many other birds of the greatest generation. As soon as New England leaves begin taking on their autumn finery, he packs up his car with his Florida license plate, dodges the worst of the hurricane season, and makes his way back to the land of orange groves and flamingos. But this year was different. First, there were the meteorological monsters that never stopped coming to the Florida area. And then there was his own personal storm, cancer. That has changed so many of his plans lately. For the first time in my adult life, Dad stayed in New England for most of all of fall season. It was late enough in the year that folks were already asking him about his plans for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And it was early enough in his battle with the disease that he was still tentative about making plans of any sort. It was also 5 years after my mother's death, and I couldn't help remembering a little miracle that had taken place and occurred during the first lonely holiday season he had faced on his own. Without his companion of 6 decades, he had been the very embodiment of sadness. Within a week of her death, he had collapsed and been hospitalized. When I flew down to see him, I knew that regardless of his illness, he was really fighting to find the will to live and might not succeed. By the time Christmas carols were playing on my rental car radio, Dad had become increasingly unresponsive, and my heart sank even heavier each day. I remember saying prayers one night that smacked of desperation, pleading, and outright bargaining. I also remember the tear I had that I was going to lose both of my parents even before I began to thaw from the numbness of my mother's death. She seemed as far away from me as he did, lying helplessly in his hospital bed, and I felt very alone. When I could finally allow my thoughts to quiet a bit that night, I felt a sensation like a soft hand placed briefly on my shoulder, then experienced a feeling similar to what I'd felt in the past when my mother would so often urge, "Come on, Pat, it'll be all right," whenever I shared my troubles with her. That feeling finally allowed me to go to sleep. Then I had a dream that I was standing in the doorway of my dad's hospital bathroom, watching as he stood at the sink with his back to me. Someone was standing behind him, much the way a nurse would do, to steady and support him. When I looked in the mirror over the sink, I saw that it was my mother who was standing behind him. Her eyes immediately looked up and gazed back at me before the dream ended. The next morning, when I went to see Dad at the hospital, a nurse stopped me on my way to his room to advise that he had gotten up in the night without assistance and fortunately made his way to the bathroom without incident. While she was unhappy about his method, she was obviously glad to share news of his improvement and his improved circumstances after he had lain immobile in bed for nearly 2 weeks. He had also taken not one, but 2 walks that morning, she told me. If my expression was astonished, Dad was positively ecstatic when I came upon him sitting up in his room. He couldn't wait to tell me about his coup of getting up and walking all that way. He hadn't actually wanted to do it at first. He told me, but your mother simply insisted, and so I just had to comply. After he had said those words, he looked a bit abashed, as though he regretted letting them out, in case I think he was crazy. I'm sure that I must have looked a bit dazed myself, standing there staring at him with my mouth open. We've never spoken of it since, although over the last 5 years, he periodically mentions curious little coincidences that help me feel that my mother is near and leave him absolutely assured that she is. The latest happened as he was gathering up his things before we headed over to the first of many radiation treatments that he would receive. He noticed something on the carpet in the living room and stooped down to retrieve it. It was a penny, something that Mother, like many people, always considered a sign of good luck. Only this penny, or pence, had Queen Elizabeth on the front, like those my English mother so often carried in her pocket. Dad hadn't seen one of those around the house for years, but I have no doubt that it's been in his pocket ever since. Thank you, Phyllis Edgerly. for your very touching story and for the reminder that our departed loved ones are always with us, always sending us love messages, especially when we need them the most. Someone once said that prayer makes it possible to open our hearts to find comfort, guidance, and inspiration. Sometimes one might even experience a miracle through prayer. It is like God taking our hand in his hand and heading us to where we need to go. In this next story, The Night on Black Mountain, the author, Jack Borgoni, shares how the power of prayer helped find a missing 12-year-old lost in the New Hampshire mountains. I was in our family room watching the news on the afternoon of July 6, 1981, when the TV announcer said, "Kevin Barker is still missing." The 12-year-old boy disappeared 2 days ago on Black Mountain in New Hampshire. The report was disturbing enough, but what tore me up inside was hearing that the lost boy was autistic, just like our 13-year-old son, John. Autism is a mental disorder in which the afflicted person suffers extreme withdrawal from reality. Autistic people often cannot speak properly or control bodily movements. When our son does talk, it's with odd vowel sounds, and he has difficulty communicating with people other than the family. I love him, and I get a big lump in my throat when I see him standing alone in the house when he should be out playing ball with other boys. The newscaster went on to say 100 volunteers had been coming and combing Black Mountain for Kevin. Skin divers are searching ponds. Helicopters have been pressed into service. At nightfall, however, the search will be called off until tomorrow morning. Called off, I said in my chair. Could that helpless boy survive another night alone? I turned up the volume as a reporter interviewed Kevin Barker's father. He looked so drawn, so anguished, as he told how his son had slipped away from a family picnic. He broke down sobbing. At that point, I almost cried myself. I stood up and turned off the set, knowing what I had to do. I had to go up to the mountain and help that father find his boy. As I headed up the stairs to get ready, I began to get angry. If God is the loving God my wife Lee said he is, then why did he let these things like this happen? Lee had become one of those born-again Christians, and that was driving me up a wall. I couldn't take all the talk about the miraculous answers to prayer, guidance by the Holy Spirit and all that. For me, I believe there is a God, but not Lee's kind of loving, with you every minute, personal God. The words she said so often now echoed in my ears. Step up in faith, Jack. Trust God. He will guide you. Yeah, I grumbled to myself as I pulled on a t-shirt and boots. I'll step out in faith. God, let's see if you can help me find that boy. It was more of a challenge than a prayer. Then I dialed the police department number shown on TV and scribbled down directions to Black Mountain. Downstairs, I grabbed one of our kids' knapsacks. You end up going up on that mountain at night, Lee said, half warning, half asking, as she made me some ham and cheese sandwiches. No, I lied, not wanting to get involved in the explanations. I'll start searching with the others in the morning. Lee knew she couldn't stop me from doing anything once my mind was made up, so I tossed the sandwiches into my car along with the flashlight and bug spray and drove off heading for Route 93, which would take me to New Hampshire. I jammed on my old car's accelerator, my mind on that little boy wandering alone in the woods. The sun began sinking as I roared along, and long shadows from the pine forest bordering the highway stretched toward me. After about 2 hours, I remembered that my gas gauge had been malfunctioning, and I began searching for a station. They were few and far between, but finally I found one. The car took a full tank. I must have been traveling on fumes. If I hadn't stopped just then, I would have been marooned perhaps for the night. After 2 more hours of nonstop driving, I finally reached the campgrounds and asked for Kevin's father. He's coming back down the trail, a man said. The boy's mother had her eye cut by a tree branch, and she's in the hospital. Why don't you come to the main building and wait? I met the camp owner and sat down in the reception lodge with 6 or 7 other searchers who had just come in. Finally, I couldn't wait. I stood up and said, I'm going up the mountain. In the morning, you mean? Said the owner. No, now. They stared at me. Have you ever had any mountain experience? Asked one. No, I answered, but I think I can handle it. What kind of equipment do you have? I held up my flashlight and the bug spray. They shook their heads. You need flares, a compass, maps, first aid kit, whistle, said the owner. You better wait until the others get back. I sat and fidgeted. When the clocks showed 11 p.m., I couldn't wait any longer, and I started toward the trail leading to the mountain. A pickup truck came roaring down the lane and stopped. In it sat the boy's father. I told him I had an autistic son too, and that I'd try to help. He couldn't say much. His eyes had that deep, hopeless look. The pickup went on toward the lodge, and I resumed walking. It had rained the past 2 days, and the forest air was cool and damp. At first all I could hear were my boots scraping the rocky path. As my eyes became accustomed to the dark, I saw the trees looming against the sky, with a tiny white star here and there. I felt terribly alone and found myself talking to God. I don't know what I'm doing here, I said, but if you want me up here to help find the boy, then I'm asking for your help. Pushing on, I called out, Kevin, Kevin, Kevin. My shouts seemed to be blotted by the woods. Every so often I stopped and listened. It was dead quiet, except for a faint rustle now and then, probably small animals. Then as I walked on, my light showed that the path separated in 3 directions. Which one? As I stood puzzling, I remembered Lee talking about asking God for a sign. Okay, God, I said. I want a sign for which path to take. Now, I don't want a frog jumping across the path or a leaf blowing in the wind. I want something definite that comes from you. Just as I said this, a brilliant blue-white flash illuminated the top of the mountain. It came from the direction of the middle path. I knew this was really dry lightning, but I pushed up the path. It seemed to indicate. Kevin, Kevin, I kept calling, but the only response was the soft rustle of a night breeze. It sounded like a whispering of many people deep in the woods. The path disappeared into a tangled brush. I looked up into the night. God, I sighed. There's no sense in me stopping and praying each time I'm stymied. If you really are who they say you are, and you want this boy found, the direction I go will be the right one. From now on, I'm going to do just what seems right. Pushing the foliage, the thick brush suddenly fell away, and I was on the path again. As the ground rose at a steeper angle, I found myself beginning to feel my 43 years. I huffed and I puffed. Then my flashlight revealed a big flat rock with an arrow painted on it. Soon after passing that landmark, I sat down in a clearing to eat my ham and cheese sandwiches. Swallowing the last bite, I rose and pressed on, continually shouting, Kevin, Kevin, Kevin. Woof! My leg gave way, and I crashed to the ground. I had stepped into a hole. As I stood up, pain shot through my left knee. I limped out, wondering if I should head back down the mountain and wait until morning like the others. God, I murmured through a gritty teeth, I'm not going to let you blame me for quitting. I didn't want to see him sitting up there after I died, saying, you know, Jack, you would have found that boy if you had just hadn't quit. I hobbled on. If I don't find him, God, I muttered, It isn't going to be because I quit. By now, several hours had passed since I started hiking, and the trees thinned out. Soon I could see where big boulders looming around me. I was at the top of Black Mountain, but I had not found Kevin. I decided to head down the other side. My knees seemed a little better, but now my mouth was so dry could I could spit cotton. The sandwiches had left me thirsty, and I kicked myself for not bringing a canteen. The people below had said there were springs up there, but who could find one? As I stumbled along, I heard a gurgling sound to one side. I pushed away the undergrowth, and water sparkled in the rays of my flashlight. I gradually gulped the cool water and continued my trek. This side of the mountain seemed darker, and the other, I felt uneasy, as if something were following me. I thought of the demons and the evil spirits that Lee had talked about, when suddenly the hair pricked up on my neck. What was that behind me? I whirled to see a grotesque bulk with twisted arms flailing at me. I froze, my heart pounding, and then I saw that it was just an old dead tree with rotten limbs extended. My mind was playing tricks on me. Even so, it had shaken me, and as I continued down the trail, I yelled all the louder, "Kevin! Kevin! Kevin!" My knee ached, and I stumbled into trees, clutching at trunks for support. Now the treetops were outlined by a gray sky. It was dawn. I trudged on, the lower tree trunks now distant in the past. The soft pearl gray light. A dog barked in the distance, and through the thinning trees I could see faint outlines of houses. I had reached the bottom. I had climbed up one side of the mountain and then down the other. I had failed. The boy was still out there somewhere. I stumbled against the pitch-black bark of a tall pine and closed my eyes, chest heaving, completely exhausted. I had done all I could do. My back slid down the trunk as I crumbled to the ground. Someone else will have to find him. God, if he's still alive. For a long moment, I sat there resting. Then I decided to find a road near the houses where I could thumb a ride back around the mountain to my car. I figured it must be about 5 o'clock. Lee and our 5 children would still be asleep unless Lee was up worrying about me. I thought about my son John, quietly resting. But Kevin Barker had been 2 days and 3 nights alone in the wilderness, and now another day. Wincing, I got to my knees and I looked up. I just couldn't quit. I stood and brushed mud and pine needles from my pants. Then I turned toward the mountain and started trudging back up. As I walked higher, the sun broke through the trees, warming my back. I was glad because the boy needed it. At the top of the mountain, however, I was stymied again. Which way now? Something pulled me to the right. Without trying to reason it, out of nowhere, I stumbled down into the trees. I did run into some searchers. They at least would eventually lead me back to the main camp. Suddenly I halted in amazement. There it was, the same flat rock with the arrow painted on it that I'd had passed in the night. The arrow pointed toward a valley. I walked toward it. "Kevin, Kevin," I called. A faint sound drilled up. It sounded like 2 men making fun of me. Were there campers down there? "Kevin, Kevin," I called. Then I heard, "Yeah, a boy's voice. It sounded like my John when he was angry. "Kevin," I screamed. Help. The odd, garbled sound I knew so well. "Kevin," I called down. "Stay there where you are." My heart raced. I didn't know what to do. If I left the vantage point, I might lose track of the boy. Autistic children are restless and unpredictable in their movements. "Oh, God, help me," I sighed, and started to call again. Suddenly leaves cracked nearby, and I heard footsteps. I looked up to see 3 men laboring up the path toward me. "Hey," wheezed the older man. "What's up?" We heard you hollering. What have you got? I pointed. I think he's down there. The men clustered around me. Where? Listen, I called out again. Drifting up through the trees came the help. I looked at them. Did you hear that? They stared at me. What? Asked one. Over there. I pointed impatiently. Listen, I called out to Kevin again. Now the answer was louder, almost strident. Oh, help, help, help. But the three men still stared at me. Look, I pressed. Send someone down to the camp and tell them we have voice contact. Are you sure? Questioned one, eyeing me strangely. Listen, I snapped. I have an autistic son at home, and I can understand this boy. One of the younger men, shaking his head, turned and headed down the path. I sensed that he was only trying to humor me. I was almost certain he didn't believe I'd heard something or anything. I turned to the remaining two men. Let's go get him. One said he would circle around the valley and go down the other side. The other offered to wait at our vantage point and give me voice directions. I pushed through the underbrush down into the valley, praying that the boy would stay put. Soon I was on solid rock, which suddenly slanted steeply down, and I found myself sliding fast. I flipped onto my belly, trying to slow myself by grabbing at cracks in the rock. Finally, I stopped, wedged against a boulder. Beyond it was a sheer drop of 20 feet. I looked around. It was impossible to climb back up. I was trapped. Several feet beyond the 20-foot drop rose the trunk of a big white birch. Could I leap far enough to grasp it, then shimmy down? Okay, God, I said. You helped me get this far, and I'm going to stop now. I'm going to jump for that tree, and I need you to help me again. I jumped. Then I was hugging smooth white bark. After sliding down to the forest floor, I could hear nothing and didn't know where the boy was. But something urged me to press on to the right. I forced my way through the thick, moist leaves and brambles when he was leaning against a fallen tree, his blond hair matted and his face and arms covered with mosquito bites. Are you Kevin? Yeah, my throat is sore. Together we walked to a clearing where the rangers found us. A helicopter swooped down to take Kevin to the hospital. He proved to be surprisingly in good shape. 5 hours later, I drove into our driveway. Lee came running to the car. Our phone had been ringing off the hook, with reporters saying that I had found Kevin. But I already knew, she cried, hugging me. When you left last night, I was so nervous I prayed, asking Jesus to keep you safe and lead you to that boy so there would be joy in the morning. She wiped her eyes. I went to bed with the assurance that you would find him. I just knew, and I told Jesus, if Jack gets discouraged and is in trouble, please wake me so I can pray. She looked at me and smiled. And you know, just about daylight this morning, about 5 o'clock, I woke up and started praying for you again. She stepped back and looked at me. Don't you believe me? I stood gazed at my wife, my sweet, wonderful, loving wife, whom I had yelled at so often for praying and asking for miracles. Then I reached out and gathered her in my arms. I believe you, honey, I said. I really believe you. Wow, that was a real powerful story. I've been in those mountains in New Hampshire, and they are beautiful, but they could be treacherous too. I want to thank you, Jack Brogani, for sharing your heartfelt story and reminding each of us how powerful prayer is in our lives. And thanks for helping to rescue that sweet little boy. You're a hero. Another story about the miracles and the power of prayer is titled Heart of My Heart, authored by Nancy Julian Kapp. Trusting God to help in a scary situation, unsure of what the outcome would be. Prayer did bring a miracle. Blades whirled atop the blue and white helicopter as it sat on the pad behind Mercy Health Center. A fire truck stood ready nearby, while I sat in my car, blinking, trying to control my emotions as I watched the Life Star unit prepare for a takeoff. There had been times in the past when I'd said a prayer for the patient being transported, whenever I've heard the emergency helicopter leaving the hospital. This time, my prayer was perhaps a little more fervent for my husband Ken as he lay on the stretcher inside. A strong north wind rocked the copter from the side to side. It slowly lifted, hovering over the pad, then lifted higher, heading east towards Topeka, where a cardiologist awaited. I watched until they were out of sight, knowing I would need Ken's Medicare and insurance cards. I headed to the golf course where he'd spent an afternoon. Driving by the university football stadium, I thought about how much Ken loved cheering for the Kansas State on an autumn afternoon, tailgating with friends and dissecting the game plan piece by piece. Afterward, the stadium parking lot was empty that day. No purple and white flags waved. We'll be there again, I told myself. Ken's car waited in the club parking lot. How lonely it looked. Still February, the course was far from the crowded. By late afternoon, his solitary car mirrored by my own feeling at that moment. So alone. After getting Kevin's wallet, I went home to call family to let them know how a perfectly fine day had suddenly cracked into shards and slivers when my husband of 38 years had a heart attack on the golf course. As quickly as I could, I explained how his golf partners hijacked another golfer's cart to rush him to the clubhouse, called the ambulance, then sped to the hospital emergency room to wait. I met them there and stood by a team while they worked over the man that I loved dearly, who was writhing in pain a few feet away from me. A new clotting dissolving drug, which must be administered within 1 to 2 hours of onset of a heart attack, worked as it was meant to. Now he was on his way to Topeka in a tiny little helicopter rocked by a furious Kansas wind. I couldn't talk long because I needed to drive the hour to Topeka to be with him. Moments later, I flew out the door back into my car. Time was my enemy, and the 1-hour trip lasted an eternity. Finally, the large regional hospital loomed before me, and I drove straight to the emergency room entrance, where the Life Star crew had delivered their precious cargo. I hurried past the security guards and found the admissions area. I gave our insurance cards to a kind young woman, and she gave me hope. Mr. Cobb is finished in the cath lab, she said. You can find him in critical care room 220. A wide smile graced her fresh face as she offered to escort me. Through one long corridor after another, she moved closer to the one person in the world I needed to see, Mr. Cobb. Kevin, my husband, father of my children, friend, lover, protector, provider. My everything. He's still here, still on this planet, still with me. Room 220. Only steps away, I felt a calm sense of peace surround me. I had the same feeling at the other moments of the unbelievable day, as if God had leaned down and whispered, "Don't worry, everything is going to be all right. Trust me." The feeling was with me in the emergency room. It was there as the helicopter lifted and when I was driving down the interstate highway. Now here it was again, bringing comfort when I needed it most. Hooked up to the tubes and monitors, wearing the latest in hospital gowns and looking perfectly content. Ken smiled at me, and the world stood still. I slipped my hand inside his and held tight as I learned that he had been to the catheterization lab, and angioplasty had been performed by a cardiologist. A stent had been inserted to hold the cleared artery open. The doctor had found a 99% blockage in one artery, with others being clear. The critical care nurse said that Kevin's future looked excellent. Little, if any, permanent heart damage was expected, since he had received treatment so quickly. Surely God heard the same prayer of thanks and praise come from both of our hearts. After discussing our day in detail, I kissed Ken's good night and left to locate the guest room the hospital had offered me. I wasn't allowed to stay in the critical care unit. Sinking down on the colorful chintz bedspread, I uttered one more prayer of thanks and prepared to call our children. Good news! Your dad is doing great, I told them. Relief travels through telephone lines with speed and clarity. Let me assure you. They would both be with us the next day, bringing their much-needed love and support. Later, as I slipped into bed, I thanked God again for answering my prayers, and I whispered good night once more to the beloved heart of my heart. Thank you very much, Nancy Julian Capp, for sharing your story with us today, Heart of My Heart. And it is also a reminder that prayer is a powerful thing, and that we have the higher power in our God to reach out to in our times of need, to comfort us, to guide us, and give us strength when we need it the most. But to also show our gratitude and love for the blessings that have been bestowed upon us. I'd like to share 3 more stories with you today before I close. And these stories are miracles and amazing messages. Have you ever received an amazing message out of the blue? It just comes out from nowhere, it seems. Good news, bad news, surprising news that turns your world upside down, or sets it right side up again. Whatever the end result, these messages out of the blue may be God just trying to get our attention. So when they come, listen up. The title of this story is called The Envelope, and the author is Catherine Lay. My dream of motherhood seemed to be disappearing. Our longed for a child had not arrived. After the 10th negative pregnancy test in the last 5 years, I had given up hope for ever being called Mama. Why? I continued to ask God. Why weren't we asking for anything wrong? We wanted to be parents. We wanted children to love and raise and teach children to share God's love and to see and lead happy lives. I couldn't understand why we were just being punished, why this prayer was going unanswered. My husband and I were surrounded by pregnant family and friends, by new nieces and nephews. We loved them all, but it was a constant reminder of the loss we were feeling. Every time another friend or family member announced that they would be having a baby, a second baby, or even a third, I had felt I had died inside all over again. Our friends tried to be a comfort. They tried to say the things that would ease our hurt, but somehow the words just pushed into my feelings of guilt. Had we angered God that this prayer wasn't being answered? Were we just meant to be childless? There were even those who suggested that we had done something wrong, disobeyed God somehow, so he was punishing us in this way. I knew deep down that wasn't true, but at times I wondered, don't you love us anymore? I asked God one morning. I don't understand why I'm not pregnant yet. Later that week, a dear friend came by my house, holding her newborn son. I held him into my arms and wondered what it would be like to hold my own child. My heart broke, but I tried to keep a smile for my friend Kathy. I can't help but see you as a mother someday. I see God working in this amazing way. I burst into tears, wanting to believe her, but afraid of holding on to my dream and finding only disappointment. It seemed that after so long, there were no more hope in my heart. Could Richard and I live our lives childless and grandchildless? Could we find other things to occupy us, obsess over a dog or our careers instead? What will your first child name be? She asked. Michael or Michelle, I answered. Richard and I had long chosen those names, meaning strength of God, even before we were married. Every time a friend had a baby, I wondered when one would name their child the same. Darla wrote something on a piece of paper. She folded it and asked me for an envelope. She put the paper inside and sealed it. Open this when he or she arrives. I put the envelope in a pocket of my purse, figuring I would never have the opportunity to read it, what it was saying inside. Have faith, she said before she left. I wanted to trust God in this, but it wasn't easy. I could only keep praying for that miracle. 5 years went by. Richard and I still longed for a child, but put our efforts into careers and ministry work. I sold all my baby items I'd been buying at garage sales over the years. It was just too painful to be reminded of our lost dream. At one point, I went through a false pregnancy, and we had begun putting together a nursery. I gave away all the furniture and tried the room, and then I turned it into an office. Then one morning, a friend who had also tried for many years to have a child called to tell us about this class she and her husband were taking to be eligible for adoption through the state. We signed up right away. Could we hope again? Was this God's design for our prayers for a child through adoption? 7 months later, we'd been approved to be adoptive parents. Our classes and home studies were done. Hours of weekly classes, stacks of paperwork, dozens of visits to our home, physicals and interviews were finally completed. It was time to wait. Again, I waited, as I'd done before, but this time the hope was stronger somehow. And on November 2nd, 1992, the call came. We had been accepted for a 9-month-old girl. The moment I saw my daughter crawling toward us, our dreams for parenthood came true. She wasn't born to us physically, but in hopes and prayers and long years of dreaming, she would soon be our daughter for our life. Her foster parents had named her Michelle. When I was told her name, I knew only God had brought this all together so perfectly. She was even the image of my husband, and still, 15 years later, people comment on how much they both look alike. It wasn't until nearly a year after she came into our lives, cleaning out my closet, that I found that old purse. I rummaged through it as my daughter played around my feet. In a zippered pocket was an envelope. I opened it and I read the note my friend had written. Kathy, give little Michael or Michelle a hug for me. Never give up faith or hope. I glanced down at Michelle and smiled. She grinned back. Play, Mama. My friend had planted seeds of faith in my heart. God had wanted them, and my dream came to life and called me Mama. Oh, how precious. What a lovely story. Thank you, Catherine Lay, for that lovely story about your daughter, and congratulations. This next story is called A Book and a Bond, and the author is Lisa Alfred. Lisa, I need to talk to you, said Debbie, walking toward me from across the room. We were standing in the classroom where we both attend a Bible study fellowship, initialed by BSF, meeting each week. BSF is a non-denominational Bible study, so women from many different churches meet together. Debbie recently lost her 27-year-old son, Joshua, in an industrial accident, and she had obviously been distressed over her loss. So the week before, I had bought Debbie a copy of a book entitled Little Taps on the Shoulder from God, which my friend had written and which contains the story of the death of my 3-year-old son Robbie in a drowning accident 24 years ago. I thought it might comfort her in some small way and help us to connect. Robbie had been riding his little tricycle around his grandmother's swimming pool while she and her brother-in-law were cleaning out the pool shed. When she realized she hadn't heard Robbie for a few minutes, she stepped out of the shed to see where he was and discovered him face down in the pool. He died about 4 days later in a local hospital, leaving me devastated, as Debbie was now. "Sure, Debbie, how can I help?" I asked. "I wanted to say thank you for the book you gave me last week. It was very helpful." "Good, I'm glad it helped. I was especially struck by the story about your Robbie. I guess we have a lot in common." "Yes, unfortunately we do. I guess we do. Tell me, Lisa," she went on with a little more intensity. "Before Robbie died, did he attend a daycare center in Hearst?" Thinking back, I said, "Why, yes, he did." "But how did you know that? How did you know?" "This news came as a surprise to me, because one of my son's best friends drowned about that time while they were attending the same daycare." "What was the name of that daycare where Robbie attended?" Let's see, I said, trying to remember. "Was it Horton's or maybe Harper's? Could it have been Harbert's?" she asked tentatively. "Yes, that's it, Harbert's. And that's where your son went to?" "Yes, in fact, I'm pretty sure Robbie and Joshua were best friends," she said with a slight smile. "Really?" I was still a bit shocked by her news. "Yes, I don't know if you remember or not, but the minister at Robbie's funeral talked about Robbie's best friend, Joshua, and how they had been such good pals." "Well, yes, now that you mention it, I do remember that. And Joshua was your son?" I asked incredulously. "Yes, can you believe it?" she said, with a touch of melancholy. "Some coincidence, huh?" Suddenly we had an instant bond, and I hugged her as our individual memories of our little Robbie and her Joshua held us together for a moment. Then we discovered that we also attend the same large church, but we didn't run into each other because we go into different services. Coincidence? I don't think so. The message of God's love in a special book formed a bridge and created a bond that will no doubt last a lifetime. God does work in mysterious ways. Thank you for that story, Lisa Alfred. The last story I'd like to share before I close today is called A Tiny Handful of Promise by Norris Burks. It was 3 a.m. when the doctors flooded her room with the light. Still numb from pain, medication, the new mom fumbled for her glasses, squinting to distinguish the blur of white coats. The doctors were saying something about needing some papers signed now. 20 miles and 20 minutes away, a high-pitched beep suddenly filled my dark room. Numb from the early hour, I fumbled for my glasses too, so I could read the number on my pager. "Oh no, it's too early," I groaned. Even if I shuffled toward the closet where I pre-positioned my clothing, still groggy, I managed to get dressed while placing a whispered phone call to the maternity ward. "Chaplain, we have a baby who's not doing well," the nurse reported. "The parents are asking for you to please come." Maternity wards are the happiest places on earth, except when they're the saddest places on earth. The contrast in patient stories on the floor can be jagged and capricious. Even as I enter a room of sobbing parents, I often will glance over my shoulder to see other families happily backslapping each other with congratulatory pats. As I stepped into the bedside, the couple told me of their journey through a problem pregnancy filled with frightening neonatal reports. Nevertheless, they had nursed thin hopes that the doctors would find things more fixable than predicted. But now the baby had arrived, and initial reports showed undeveloped lungs and a leaky heart that was beginning to fail. Concerned doctors were seeking parental consent for a birthday surgery. Has God just teased us? The parents wondered aloud. What do we have to do? How do we pray? What do we say? Would it help to baptize the baby? Can you baptize her, chaplain? I'll bless her. Something. We've got to do something. She's got to have a chance. Now, you have to understand, in my tradition, I don't baptize babies. But those who would argue theologically at a time like this have never looked into the eyes of desperate parents and heard them say, "Do something, chaplain." I asked the mother if she might have the strength to come with me to the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU, which staffers pronounce NICU. The NICU is a world of wires, IV bottles, tubes, and black lit beds that remind me of the scene in the movie E.T. when scores of scientists and doctors examine the little alien. In close quarters, the doctors, nurses, and respiratory therapists squeeze through tangled tubes to deliver high specialized health care to the tiniest people you'll ever see. But as cramped as it was in there, the staff made room as I entered with parents and two sets of grandparents in tow. As we encircled the baby, the usually noisy NICU fell silent in readiness for this emergency blessing. Mom stood beside her tiny daughter, stroking the baby with her index finger in an attempt to reestablish a sustaining love of the umbilical cord. Her finger seemed just long enough to maintain a fragile connection between her and this baby of faith. It was an image reminiscent of the fingertip touch between God and Adam in Michelangelo's painting in the Sistine Chapel. In the E.T. movie, special effects artists attempted to recreate the scene using extraterrestrial with a flashlight finger to deliver a healing touch to a child. But Hollywood could never paint this scene. Yes, it is a scene that is enacted every day in our special care nursery. Here was the mother trying to give very breath to a child who could only breathe with a machine. With the touch of a single finger, Mom was sharing the hopes and the prayers of her family. Unceremoniously opening a bottle of sterile water, I placed a drop on the baby's forehead and asked God to bless this child in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. With that, Mom's whimpers melted into weeping, and as she cried, she took her daughter's tiny hand and, finding a spot that wasn't wrapped, poked on, monitored, she placed a kiss in that tiny palm and whispered something into those little curled-up fingers. Then, as if she had placed a thing of priceless value in her daughter's grip for safekeeping, she closed it tight. This mother's love reminded me of the miraculous way in which God whispers his love into the hand of each of us when we are born, placing there a promise that no matter what, he will never let us go. And having pledged that love to us from our first breath to our last, he wraps our fingers around that promise for safekeeping. The Apostle Paul wrote, "For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is the Christ Jesus our Lord. Romans 8:38-39. Even as a minister, I sometimes forgot how personal and deep God's love for each of us is. I often talk about the depth of God's love, but it took a mother's heartfelt whisper into a tiny hand to remind me that God is always there to love you, to love me, and all I need to do is to reach out and accept it. I'll never know the exact words this young mother entrusted to her daughter's grip, but in the coming weeks of miraculous procedures and risky surgeries, the real miracle that was witnessed by all who would see it was how this little girl never released the grip of her mother's promise. 3 months after her birth, she went home, a healthy little girl. Wow, that was a great story. How touching. It had to be so hard. Thank you, Norris Burks, for that beautiful story. And bless the mother and her baby and that family. That was rough going, I know, but they got home with their little girl, and thank you, God, for that. So, my dear friends, it's been a long journey for people, and this has been a long program today. But I wanted to make up for the time I hadn't been here for you. So I wanted to say thank you so much for tuning in. And I hope you all have a great week and a great month. And I will be back with you soon. I think next time I'm with you, I'm going to talk about miracles of love and the gifts that we can give to others. Thank you so much for listening today. And you take care and may God bless. And until next time, this is Natalie Silva with Life Treasures and Golden Moments.